What's up, everyone? Andy Cantu here from Lux Travel Hacks, and today I want to let you in on a little secret that has allowed me to, and thousands of others that I've taught, to find amazing award flights. That's flights using points in business and first class, even in economy, all over the world, and especially from smaller airports, bigger airports, wherever you might be. And that secret is called positioning, and it's not anything out of this world. It's a very simple concept that is not immediately apparent to people that are not playing the travel hacking game, the luxury travel hacking game specifically. So we're going to talk about it today. First off, what is positioning? Positioning is the concept of flying to or from an airport other than the one you're actually trying to fly from. I know that sounds maybe weird and counterintuitive and like, why would that work? But let's go over an example, right? Let's just say you are in Cleveland, Ohio, or Columbus, Ohio, or something, right? You have two decent airports there, Cleveland and Columbus. There's a big, I believe they're even international airports, but the reality is that they don't have a lot of flights to Europe, especially not to Asia. Anything big and overseas, you're going to find it pretty tough to fly out of there. And even domestically, you are a little bit limited in the kind of routes and airlines that serve those airports. So what happens is a lot of people that are new to this game might, pull up United or AA sites or whatever and just search Cleveland to Paris, or even worse, somewhere that's like not a big hub in Europe, like Cleveland to Zagreb, Croatia, or whatever, right? And that's not going to work. Like, the chances are 99+% that that is not going to work. And what ends up happening is you start to think, oh, well, points don't work, award flying doesn't work, like it's so difficult to use points, or whatever bajillion excuses, right? The reality is that you're just not looking right, and you have to be using positioning when you're in these kinds of situations. And even me, that usually flies out of a lot of big airports, depending on where I am in that moment, I travel a lot, right? Sometimes I find it necessary to position, even not only just to get it done, but to also get a better deal. Sometimes it's worth it, and sometimes it's not, right? So we're going to go over all those kinds of things, but that's what that concept is. So if you were in Cleveland or Columbus, instead of searching from Cleveland or Columbus, you might say, okay, well, let me search from other places that would have long-haul flights to where I'm trying to go. I'll figure out the most important piece, which is the big long-haul flight first, make sure I have that in business class or that in economy even, but for free with points, and kind of like secure the difficult, if you want to say that, part of the trip. And then you figure out the smaller flights. So we're going to go into some kind of real life examples here. This is Seats.Aero. It's a great tool for finding award availability. That's availability on points flights. If you haven't used it before, I think I go over it in some other videos, but check it out. I won't go into like the nitty gritty of what this tool does, how it works, and all that stuff. But I'll give you at least some surface level knowledge so we can go over positioning. So here I'm searching USA to Europe. This is the exact same thing I would do regardless of where I was flying from. If I was flying from Cleveland or Columbus, I might add in here Cleveland, Columbus, just to see. But since I know the odds are so low for this example, I wouldn't. But you could, if you really wanted to. You would just have to untoggle direct flights, because there probably are none from there, and see if you find any layover options. But I'm going to show you how we might build that layover in ourselves after the fact, which is what I would recommend. So let's start with the big long haul. We want to go to Europe. Maybe it's Paris, maybe it's Rome or Milan. We'll look at a couple options. I just picked sometime in April as like a hypothetical trip. And then these codes here, USA and Europe, are going to show us, you can see the Europe one has all of these big hub airports over there, so you don't have to even know them top of your head. And USA, same thing. If you see one in here that is big, I don't think there are any that I would search other than these. So it's probably fine. Yeah. So anyway, USA to Europe. Let's just say we are in Cleveland. The ideal thing would be to fly out of like a central airport like Chicago, Houston, Dallas, Atlanta maybe, or an East Coast airport like, New York, DC, Boston, Miami, maybe even Charlotte in the Carolinas or whatever. So the thing that I would start with here is my destination. Positioning is a concept that can be applied to both origin and destination. So if you're flying from Cleveland, you might end up flying from New York, and you would pay cash for a flight from Cleveland to New York. But also, if you were flying to some miscellaneous place like Zagreb, or like even some of the islands off the southern coast, like of Spain or whatever, I don't know, Malta or something, I don't even know where that is, like relative to the other big hubs, but something that's not a big hub in Europe, you might end up positioning on that side too. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how to make that like a kind of a seamless process for you, or a seamless experience. But we first will want to find our ideal thing, and our ideal thing might be Milan or Rome. So MXP is Milan. We can see here a good example of the positioning happening live here, which is that on various days, the 22nd, 3rd, and 4th, I just put like a small date range, you can get from New York to Milan on Emirates, on American Airlines. Those are kind of our two options. So imagine you were flying from Cleveland to Columbus, you searched Columbus to Milan. There's no Emirates flight from Columbus to New York, much less Columbus to Milan, so you would never find this ticket, period. And you can instead now fly it for, 68,000 points, 87,000 points, much better than the hundreds of thousands that the credit card portals will charge you, which is a whole nother topic, but this is the right way to use points, is transferring to partners. And this is a great example of positioning. We would just pay cash from a flight Cleveland to New York, and then we would take this Emirates flight New York to Milan. And of course, there are like some risks and things to deal with like checked bags and stuff. What if it doesn't get checked the whole way? I'm going to talk about that in a second. But this is just one example of that. Let's just say we were maybe going to, Paris or something instead. That's CDG. You can actually, instead of USA, put East Coast or West Coast here, like EST. But I don't think there's a central one. Maybe there is. There's not. So I just put all USA and kind of just go through them myself. Some of these are West Coast, like Seattle, LA, but then there's New York and New York again, Chicago to Paris for 85K. That's a little high. I would normally be looking for like 50 or 60 or 70 even. But the point is, all of these options are now open to you if you're going to Paris. You have to stop anyway coming from a small airport. So what do? You position. You find the big long haul route, which is this, and then you pay a small cash flight. And it doesn't always have to be cash. Maybe you can pay a points flight, a small points domestic flight, if you're willing to, if you want to spend a little bit more points instead of spending your cash. But the whole idea is that you get yourself to Chicago or to New York or Newark or whatever, and then you take the big long haul points flight in luxury, relaxed, and for basically free, right? And that's how you turn difficult routes from airports that are not easy to get in and out of, like Cleveland or Columbus, for example, and turn them into a successful redemption, and still only with a one stop to either Milan or to Paris, right? So that's how that works. This also works in cash. Just like honorary mention, I guess, right? You might want to look for cash flights when you are paying them from different airports and see if you can drive to that airport or take a cheap flight to that airport, or you can use Southwest to get to that airport cheap, and then you fly from there United to wherever that's a little bit farther. So I won't go all into that, but this is a concept that works in both Cash World and Points World, even though we primarily use it in Points World. Now, let's talk about some of the risks, right? You are basically building out one ticket via two tickets. Like you're paying your own way to Chicago or New York, and then you are usually on a different partner or different airline or whatever on points on long haul to Europe, right? So what happens? There are a couple things here. Number one to be concerned with probably is layover times. Normally, when you book a big ticket, the layover times are calculated, sometimes even regulated, and they make it so that you're probably not going to miss your flight unless something goes like really wrong with the first flight or something like that. So when you're booking separate tickets, especially when they're not like associated airlines, they're completely different airlines, or they're not part of the same alliance or partnership at all, you have to regulate that yourself, right? So the biggest thing is don't build tight connections, don't run risky things. Personally, what I do when I'm traveling, I want it to be kind of as low risk and low inconvenience and low stress thing as possible. Travel is already stressful sometimes, things happen and whatever, especially if you don't travel a lot, right? So you want to kind of build buffers where you can and mitigate these risks. So an easy example of that is, let's just say you were taking this, I like the Milan Emirates option. It's one of my favorite products. So let's just say you're taking this on the 23rd. You can click I here, business or economy, whatever, it's the same flight, 10 p.m. So you can get to New York anytime that day, and it would be fine in theory if there are no delays or cancellations. But remember, you're coming from an airport that doesn't have a lot of options to begin with, usually, Columbus, Cleveland, whatever, right? Like how many flights are there to New York on the airline that you bought? If you miss that one flight, are they able to put you on another one that gets you here on time? Or will you miss it completely until the next day? Is there only like one per day to New York, for example? These are things you have to think about, right? Especially if it's not New York, maybe it's Boston or DC or somewhere else that there's only one flight per day from Cleveland. So you have to factor in all this stuff, and maybe you decide, and what I would personally do is I would say, you know what, even if there's a second or third flight that day to New York, I would personally get there the day before or even 2 days before, turn it into a baby trip, hang out in New York, whatever, a couple nights, probably points nights at a super nice hotel, or even one night or whatever, And what you do there is you break up your trip. It's more relaxed because you don't have to worry about like an immediate layover, running to your gate, anything like that, missing a flight, cancellations, delays. It's literally all those problems disappear because you have such a good buffer that you're just not going to run into them. Even if something happens, you're still getting there the day before or 2 days before, or maybe you would end up there like early morning this day in the worst case scenario or something. And you have effectively reduced all your risk. That's what I would do when positioning. And that's usually what I try to do anyway, because I don't like long pieced together routings or even huge long flights. I tend to prefer to stop, take a breather, and then continue, right? Because the worst thing is to miss a flight or to have cancellations or delays. And I thankfully haven't had that in a long time since I started operating this way, building buffers and things like that. The second thing to consider that's really important for a lot of you, I am full team carry-on. I don't believe in checked bags. I don't like the risk of them losing my stuff or lugging around big heavy stuff, especially through Europe or whatever. But if you want to check bags, when you're flying on 2 separate tickets on what you have created, this one long itinerary, you have to understand that if the airlines are not partnered or part of the same alliance or have some kind of code share agreement, then they will likely not check your bag the whole way. You can always try and ask them, and if they are partnered in some way, they'll do it. They'll check it the whole way, even if it's 2 separate tickets. But if they are not able to do that, you have to know that in many cases, you're going to have to stop in New York, grab your bag, recheck it, go through TSA again, or security in whatever country, right? And kind of redo the whole process again, right? So with check bags, something to be aware of. If you yourself are aware of partnerships and alliances and these kinds of concepts, which are big things that I talk about in Lux Travel Hacks, then you might be able to, on purpose, build a trip with partners, even if it's separate. For example, this flight here, New York to Milan, is operated by American Airlines, right? So as long as you booked American Airlines from Cleveland to JFK, or from wherever to JFK, if you were positioning from somewhere else, in theory, American Airlines will be able to check it the whole way because they are the same airline or partnered or whatever. So you can be aware of that in advance and see if you can arrange it that way, but sometimes it won't work out. You'll have to fly Delta to New York, and then you'll fly American to Milan or Emirates to Milan, and so they don't even really know about each other. They can't control anything in between your 2 itineraries, right? So you have to regulate it. And as a result of that effort and as a reward for it, you get obviously $10,000 or whatever of 2 round-trip tickets for free instead using points, right? So those are the 2 big risks. Manage your layovers, regulate them yourself, build buffers where you can, and kind of make it so that you have a more relaxed traveling experience. And if you're checking bags, just know that you may have to pick them up and recheck them. Coming back in the US, and I don't know if any other countries are like that. I think there are some in the world that I just don't remember top of my head. But coming back in the US, for example, in the US, you always have to pick up your checked bags in the first port of entry. So if you come back in the US via New York, even if they are partners, you'll have to pick up your bags, passport, immigration, whatever, and then go to your other gate, check your bag again, TSA, and then continue. So sometimes you can't get around it regardless. But just be aware of that, and if you can get around it, then do it, right? So anyway, that's all I wanted to go into. Minor risks, if you ask me. It's still very worth it, very worth the effort. Be aware of how this all works, and you'll be able to open, your options to having all these different award options and points options that you didn't consider before or even see before, because you may have even been looking just from small airports. Even if I know people that are using Seats Aero, before they join Lux Travel Hacks and kind of understand these concepts better. And even in here, you're looking Cleveland to all Europe or whatever, and literally finding 0, right? So positioning is a very important concept, and that's why I always start with USA and kind of know that I 50-50 will need a position depending on the airport that I am coming from. Sometimes you get lucky and it comes out perfectly. Sometimes you have to position, but the idea is to just build routes that help you maximize your points, get good luxury travel value, and enjoy your trips, right? So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in first class.